We're not going to show you PowerPoints here. We're going to get you engaged in this process today. And I'm going to start off, and we're going to go back and forth. And we can either, we could use the board too. We're going to look at a little bit about how to reach out to diverse audience with this message of arthritis and treatment and care and prevention. And I want you folks to be part of this discussion. And I think you probably know who we are, and we've done some work in the past with trying to reach audiences that are a little bit different. And I want you to think about what makes up a special population. What are the things that you think about or characteristics that relate to a special population? We're going to put those down. Yes? Gender. And that even actually has some different meanings to it today. Mm-hmm. What else? Ethnicity. Okay. Age. Okay. Economics. Self-perception. You always come up with these good ones. Religion. Culture. Ability.
Geographical location.
Okay, location.
What do you mean by self-perception?
Whether they see themselves as a special population.
Okay. So how you see yourself? Isn't this much more fun than listening to power? Anything else? Where does some of this come from? I mean, if you look historically, where does some of this language come from? How many of you work for a public agency of any kind? What do you have on most of your documents? Equal opportunity statement. Okay, and so if you go back far enough, where did some of that? A lot of it that's now what we call protected classes are really not protected by the Constitution. We just sort of added those on administratively. But if you go back to the Constitution, it gives rights to certain people, and there are protected classes for providing insurances of equal rights. And so one of the things we have to make sure is what we do is ensuring that whatever programs we do reach those audiences, and sometimes we forget about that. I have a shirt that my wife hates me to wear, but I do wear it at family reunions, that it says extremely normal. You ever seen those shirts? There's a whole bunch of products you can buy that for the extremely normal average person. Okay, so because I think that's how most of us write materials or do things, is we do it for that normal, typical person, and it becomes more expensive to begin to target. In this room, there are a number of protected groups or special populations. Some people hate that word special because it comes back from being special ed or whatever it is. But there are unique populations in this room. And if we were to sit down and look at it long enough, we could probably end up with about 20 special populations represented in this room. Okay? Some of you are Calvinist, and some of you are Armenian. Some of you, you hold different political views. Some of you are actually Democrats. Some. Right. Okay. All right. So political affiliation. Paul, do you have any others?
Well, there's a difference between ethnic and racial.
Okay. Do we have it? Okay. Educational level. Okay. Now let's move forward from. I think you'll add some others there, but let's move forward and look at some specific characteristics that you hold or perceive to hold about some of these groups, and this is where it gets really interesting. Okay. Now we're not supposed to talk about this stuff in public. But there are differences in these groups that may make a difference in the way you reach them. Let's pick one out. food preference? Do any of you have food? Holy smokes, I could get this thing could really open up here. Don't even start, okay? Now, if I'm running a conference today, I need to worry about what groups? The vegans, the vegetarians.
People gluten problems.
Okay.
Yeah, I was going to say the peanut allergy people. Health issues.
No, and I don't mean, this is where I get in trouble, you know, and because I think we have to have this freshness about discussion. Otherwise, we live in two worlds. One that goes on in your brain that no one dares to talk about. But it's like when the pork producers sponsored our extension banquet, and we have 20 Jewish families that are involved in there. Okay? And we say, we can't have pork. And the pork producers say, holy smokes, this is Indiana. We're the third leading pork producer in the United States. We're one of the major exports. And you're telling us we won't serve pork? How'd you like to be the administrator solving that problem? Okay. Does it make a difference in how you reach those audiences? What other characteristics? Don't clam up on me here. Let me pick one here. I'm trying to generate discussion.
We have it in our mind, Bill.
Oh, yeah, I know, but you're gutless. You're gutless.
Roll of women up and then you say gutless.
No.
I think you're looking for a fight.
No, I'm not. I'm just saying I've spent 33 years sitting in faculty meetings where there are two agendas going on all the time. There's the agenda that's in the brain about things like affirmative action, and we don't dare talk about it because it's all going on inside our heads. And then where do we talk about it? In the restroom. Or over at the field house where we're working out. Or we're walking across campus. Okay? And I'm saying that's very hurtful to us because it's...
Actually talk about it with someone you trust.
Right.
Because
Okay.
it does become,
Okay.
in a group
Well,
especially like this, it's a trust issue.
Okay, yeah. So I'll give you an example. You know, let's pick food preference. We just talked about one that's pretty sensitive. Or you get into the jokes about fried chicken. You know, just try to have a meeting in Indianapolis with in the downtown area, and you say, well, we assume who's going to come to this, so we better have fried chicken. And then the room gets real quiet. And some guy says, I don't like fried chicken. I want barbecue. You know, and so, but see, the perception is that I've made a comment that's hurtful because of the assumption that I've made. But we make those assumptions every day. All the time we make those assumptions. The role of women. And Paul and I have worked a fair amount with the Amish community. If you don't think the role of women doesn't play an important, have an important role in that community, then you really don't understand that community. Does that mean that the women in the Amish community have no power?
They have all the power.
They have a lot of the power. But it's pillow talk power, as one of the bishops told me. What my wife says in my ear in bed carries a lot of weight in my life. But in public, she's quiet. Why is that so? Where does that come from? Scripture. Yeah, comes from their understanding and their following of a scriptural lifestyle, and that the role of the woman should be more quiet. So if you go, I'll give you an example. We have a county with a lot of Amish in it, and the local hospital administrator happened to be female, and she saw what Paul and I were doing up in northern Indiana, and said, we can do this too. So she held a meeting for all the Amish to come to. She was the only person there representing the hospital. The bishops came and the elders came. Do you think she ever got what she wanted? No. She didn't understand the interaction that took place in that community. Didn't mean she couldn't have tried some other way, but I think most hospital administrators that are female are what? Like you know what's going on in my head, but you don't have the guts to say it. Most of them are a little bit pushy. Assertive. Okay. And so you get into a group of Amish bishops and men who and they're seeing this woman as being a little assertive and pushy, they are very polite. They're very kind, and they're very appreciative, and they will leave, and that's the last you'll see of them. Because it just doesn't fit well with them in most cases. And that's a generalization, because maybe there's some that'll try to work it out and work through it, but the reality is those are some of the things that do take place. Any other kind of characteristic? Yes?
I was just going to say, and the reason that she may be more pushy is that in the hospital.
That's the only way she could ever get there.
That's what she's had to do. to
That's
adjust
right,
to
right.
that.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's how, we have a female president of Purdue. I don't think she got there by being the traditional, playing the traditional role of how we might have looked at females 20 years ago or whatever. What are some other characteristics here?
Community,
Okay.
like being like really individualistic versus more like
Very good.
the common good is like,
How do we as normal, how do you like that? Normal Americans view the individual?
Absolutely.
It's all about you.
It's all about me. If I have to run over my grandmother to get president, I'll do that. Okay? I'm generalizing, but there are cultures. I've spent a fair amount of time teaching in China where the culture is very different. There's more of a collective thought. And you have to understand that there's, if you go in there and you just say it's sort of trying to get them to be aggressive or to succeed in certain levels. Why is China changing so much right now? Looking at that Chinese culture. Where's it coming from? It's us. We're not only getting a lot of, Happy Meal toys from them, we're shipping our movies and our culture, and they're buying into it pretty heavily. What's the number one selling car in China today? The number one selling car in China today. It's a Buick. A Buick. Isn't that cool? Okay. We're teaching them it's about us and how we look, how we drive, and everything. The role of the individual is really, really important as we work with groups. I think within the Hispanic community, the role of women. I was in a school, here's these generalizations that are damaging, I think, but they're the facts of a principle talking about this, where 50% of the Hispanic girls in that school will be pregnant before they reach their senior year. 50%. Okay? How'd you like to be the principal of a school? And the bottom line is nobody wants to talk about it. Do you think where's that coming from? I think that's coming from a culture, a mindset, a view of women, the role of manhood, masculinity, and all that kind of stuff. I don't want to get too deep into this because you can do a 3-credit course on this stuff, but I'm trying to look at how do we communicate these messages out there. What are some other things that might be of significance as we're trying to reach an audience?
What about resistance to change? Holding on to traditional ways of doing things.
Two points there. When I attended a little country church for about 12 years, and I tried to get some of the kids in my class to go to college, and that really became divisive because I was suggesting change, and they had a low perception of higher education. They didn't want those kids. Why? Because those kids, if they didn't get an education, did what? Stayed close to home. And so here I was sending them off to college. Next thing you know, they took a job in Chicago, the ends of the earth. Okay, so that's important. Okay, the point, Paul.
To mention is the perception of disability, how that
Okay.
relates to the culture. Bill, just to go back to your resistance to change real quick, do you think some of that resistance to go to college also came from the previous generation, from their parents? Because some of that may have.
Oh, that the parents were the ones that were fighting it.
Yeah, well, because the parents, maybe the parents didn't get an education.
Right, yep.
And then therefore they feel that there was not that need to further education.
I think there's a fairly low view of higher education developing across the country. I think what they're seeing is a very high number of graduates from Purdue not getting jobs this year. And that's true across the country. We have people working, like, this is an IU joke. What's one of the first things they teach a senior IU graduate to say? Would you like fries with that order? Okay, and so I think people are saying, we spent $50,000, $60,000 to send my kid to college, and he doesn't have a job. So there's that perception that it's eroding somewhat the value. Anyway, we got to move on here. So let's explore a couple of case studies here. Paul, we only have a limited amount of time here, and I just wanted to set the stage here that all of you are narrow-minded bigots. Fundamentally, you are. Somewhere in your heart, there's something, you have a problem with people that eat barbecue all the time, or that have a low level of, or low perception of women in a role of leadership, or that may view people with disabilities in a certain way, and you just don't like those people. Oh, I'm sorry. I do try to engage everybody here in some way, even if it's awkwardness, okay? I think it's true, though. I mean, if we could sit down with you one-on-one and just talk about some of your perceptions, you'd find out some of you have a negative feelings about black people because of how you grew up. I grew up in a community that had no blacks whatsoever. None. The only ones we ever saw came and picked beans. And we were told to stay away from their camps. The elders in my church bought a property to avoid a black college professor from buying that property. And we viewed him as being a hero. And then, how can that ever get out of your system? And some of you have that in your, and it's not because that's you want to be, it's just that's how you grew up, your culture. Yeah.
But isn't some of that natural and automatic if...
It's defensive?
Yeah, but let's say, we've lived for a long time trying to survive. So we have to make sweeping generalizations.
Right,
if
we
I
do.
eat red berries and I get really sick,
Right.
so then I don't eat any red berry, whether they're raspberry or whatever. All red berries are bad. I have to make a sweeping generalization until somebody points out this kind is really okay to eat. Because we can't process everything. Individual. We don't have time in our lives to do that. Yeah. We can't process every possible scenario, so we cut corners by generalizing.
Yeah. See, to me, it's, I grew up in a little narrow-minded community. We were kind of low income, but now I've gotten to travel the world. I've walked the streets of Seoul and Beijing and Bangkok and Kiev and in the middle of the night, because I like seeing what's going on in these big cities. I've never felt threatened, but I won't walk the streets of Chicago in the middle of the night because inside I have a perception of when I've been there. And the only place I've had a gun put to my head and said, please empty your wallet into my hand was on the Purdue campus. The only place I've ever felt threatened with my life was on the Purdue campus. I never had a problem anywhere else in the world. And I'm just saying, we build these perceptions of what's safe and what's not and all that kind of stuff. And most of it's, like you say, it's part of defense, part of our, how we survive. Okay, yes. Isn't this fun?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good, okay.
I think one thing that really affects the way that we view cultures and is a lot of our pop culture, the way
Well, yes.
you're constantly, who's the thug in the movie, who's the burglar, who's
Right.
the savior,
Yep.
who's the, it warps your mentality into making those generalizations where it's like, your poor community, who is that's portrayed in your movies, or who is it that's in the television show? And I just, it makes sense to me the way that we think. It just really makes me mad because it's.
Who remembers the play West Side Story?
Yeah, really.
Okay, who were the good guys in West Side Story? Who are the bad guys in West Side Story? The Puerto Ricans. They're the ones that knifed everybody. And then if you look, there was a study done on West Side Story. And the Puerto Ricans got to say nothing, practically nothing. They had no songs. So what was perceived from that, from the people that saw that play, was that the ones who were given the most significant roles were who? The good people. The ones who were given no roles, but only where they were sort of violent related, tended to be the bad guys.
I think one of the areas you get into there.
He's English. Did you notice he's got this accent? I just can't stand that accent. It just drives me right up a wall. Okay.
You know, it's that maybe the idea that popular culture is reflecting the heuristics that people actually operate in. The people who write movies and who write scripts are also part of society. So they are themselves reactive, responding, and reflecting back to us what we find pleasing, because it actually reaffirms in some way many of the stereotypes that we carry around as our day-to-day baggage, and the way we make sense of the world is through those stereotypes. So I'm not saying it's good. What I'm saying is, you know, they're part of the process. They are not the definers of our culture. They're reflecting our culture as well.
But we suck it in pretty good. We do.
It fits with our mindset.
Okay, now we're going to move into these two case studies. We've generated a lot of discussion here and all that kind of stuff. Is that in our efforts with the AgrAbility Project and the work we do at Purdue, we've been trying to customize some delivery mechanisms for different audiences. And Paul's going to talk about the work with respect to the Hispanic population, and I'll do the one with respect to the Amish population, and just go, hit little things that we've learned along the way. Our first effort with the Amish population was a coloring book, and I'll pass some of these around, and you can, whoever really wants one, we can get one to it. But this was really designed by the Amish. I wrote the material. And we used a family of, he was a cheesemaker up in northern Indiana. He did all the artwork in the coloring book. And then I worked on the text, and then he had 11 children. So we had our only test site. We could only just go to one place and had 11 children. And I spent a lot of time with those kids learning to color with the kids, because they loved to color. And during church services, they would be given coloring sheets to color. And so the idea of a coloring book came out of their the discussions we had with them. And they wanted to look at the whole issue of safety. And next thing you know, we got into a biblical view of safety, because that's what's important to them. I could say, well, let's make this a totally secular book, but then they wouldn't have been interested in it. And so we took this to Purdue, and Purdue looked at this and says, oh no, you're quoting the King James Version. Holy smokes, we're going to all go to hell quick if we do that. Or we're going to get cited by the Supreme Court or somebody. You're going to say something. So we went off campus and did that. And it's a funny story is that when they first saw that, I didn't have any money to print that, and I went to a meeting, and the guy, one of the elders of the church, came and brought me a roll of money about that big around, a lot of money. And he said, I want to buy one of these coloring books for every first, second, third grader in northern Indiana, 2,300 copies. And now we're up to around 30,000 copies of this have been shipped out all over the country, mostly to the Amish community. But it's really not a Purdue publication. It's one that we just sort of instrumented to have happen, and it met their cultural needs. It was one that obviously they've adopted. It's used in Holmes County, Ohio. It's used in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. They sell it in some of their stores. And the point is that if you make it theirs, we do stuff at Purdue that's ours, and we think it's gorgeous. And we put it in our mailroom, and we sell 20 a year because nobody wants it. But it's ours because we've never sat down and talked with the community that's supposed to use this thing. And there's no buy-in, but it's gorgeous because it's ours. And we use the best talent at the Purdue campus to design it, lay it out, but nobody wants the stuff because we never asked the people. So then the next one that Paul is very instrumental in doing, is this is kind of cute. And it's called, the Amish wanted something after a number of incidents up there of where cars hit buggies. They wanted something for the general public that visited the Amish community, and it's called Sharing the Road. And the first version we did with this, was really plain. There was no color in it. We were trying to be Amish. And we showed that to them, and the guys looked at us and said, that really looks plain. Oh, I said, well, that's supposed to be plain because you're plain people. You're simple. It says, this isn't for us. This is for the idiots that come here every year and drive 80 miles an hour on our dirt road to see how many Amish they can run over while they're here. So we want it to be attractive so that they'll pick it up and read it. I thought that was cute. We were not meeting their needs. So then, Paul, you really helped design all that, right? And there's an interesting part in here. This is Paul Jones, okay? And we quoted the love portion out of 1 Corinthians. It says, love is patient, love is kind. You ever heard that verse? Okay. And I had Paul. I knew if we put the Apostle Paul, the Supreme Court would have to decide whether we could distribute this or not. So we just put Paul on the bottom. And I have a letter buried on my desk from a very educated person saying, Paul Jones is the most marvelous poet. Okay? They could not relate to this as big. I mean, this is awesome stuff. Where does Paul come up with this? I mean, you're not paying this guy enough. Okay? So it's really, the old Paul, from a long time ago. And so we had no clue, and about 70,000 copies have been distributed of these to rest stations across the state, Amish, outlets, and I know they've gone all over the country. And we're down to about the last of these from the initial printing. It was paid for by the most appropriate group in our state, the Prevention of Drunk Drivers or something. They picked up the cost for doing that. And then we came out with the plain facts for the Amish folks. We don't discuss using electric heaters. Just doesn't fit. And we talk about alternative treatments, which is very, very much a problem within the Amish community. They've bought into a lot of just sort of unfounded practices to try to treat arthritis. And this has gone fairly well. We're in our second or third printing of it. And it's even picked up by a lot of farmers who just find the approach here to be quite simple and straightforward. And so it's worked kind of well. So I guess the summation of what I'm trying to say is that you need to know the audience. You got to work with them, get buy-in, and encourage them to be a part of the distribution process, and then be sensitive as they tell you as you work along. It's just not about me and what I think looks good. It's also, is it going to fit the needs of that audience and make them buy into using the material and sharing it with their neighbors and all that kind of stuff. And Paul, you had sort of the same experience with the Spanish novella. Yeah, why don't you do that? And I promise I won't say anything else.
Sure. Okay, to give you a background, does everyone have a copy of this, or would you like another copy if you don't have a copy?
I need a reacher for that one.
Yeah, there you go. I got it. There's some more of them. Sure, there's more out there. The first arthritis publications from Purdue, or Breaking New Ground, were done in the 80s. I don't remember the exact date. It was probably about 83. The first farming and arthritis brochures, I think, were done in the 80s. And there were 2 or 3 versions of that done. And then in 2004, we decided to update those with the first iteration of Arthritis in Agriculture. And then in 2000, just this last year, we updated that publication with a different look and a few adjustments. But in 2007, we decided that we were going to look at producing some type of Spanish language version of this material that we'd been working on for 20 years. And some of the questions were, what kind of format would that take? Do we just want to take this book and translate it into Spanish? Would that be the most effective thing to do? And who would the audience for that be? An example of something that was done that way is this Simple Solutions that was done by Centers for Disease Control. And I don't know if you've seen this. We should have probably brought a box of these with us, but they are available for free through the CDC. But it's got a variety of ergonomically related solutions, modifications to farm work. For example, a harvesting cart that I think some of you have seen examples of. But what they did for the Spanish population was simply take that book and translate it word for word. Now, some of the issues that we might want to talk about would be readability. Who is actually going to be using the publication? And I think, Dr. Field, you said that these didn't.
You can get a lot of them free if you want. They've got a
they didn't go too well, and that may be a factor in terms of it's not always advisable just to take whatever you've got and translate it into a different language if you're looking at a whole different population, and we can discuss that a little bit. So what we did was partner with an organization that's already working with a lot of Latino or Hispanic farm workers, and that's California AgrAbility. In fact, it's kind of their specialty to work with that population. Within their team, they partner with the Arthritis Foundation, so they were part of this process. And within our team, it started out as Indiana AgrAbility and gradually moved to the national project when we received that grant. But the Arthritis Foundation in Indiana was one of our partners, and also Transition Resources, which Rusty Shade over here is a staff member from, and they specialize in working with migrant seasonal farm workers in Indiana, partly in terms of transitioning to other types of work. There was a lot of discussion early on as to, again, who was going to benefit from this and what kind of format would be the most appropriate. In talking to the California group, if we're going to translate it to Spanish and it's going to be agriculture related, probably the most probable group to read something like that would be migrant seasonal farm workers. That was their conclusion. And with that in mind, and these statistics came from the California AgrAbility Project. Let me dig this out. One of their statistics. Excuse me for taking a minute. But it's in terms of the number of Spanish-speaking people that don't read Spanish well. And I'm sorry I can't find that statistic right now, but it's a pretty significant percentage of that population. I'm sorry, right here. 85% of workers, and that's migrant seasonal farm workers, say that they have difficulty reading and understanding written information even in their first language. So literacy among the population in Spanish is not that great. So the decision was made, rather than simply translating, was just to use the basic information and look at a whole new format. And that's where we came up with the Fotonovela idea. The Fotonovela actually has been around since the 40s, approximately, and started out in Mexico as kind of an entertainment media, but it's moved into health-related information, all kinds of things. If you've turned on a Spanish language television station, if you watch it for very long, it's likely you're going to encounter a soap opera type program, and that's known as a telenovela. This is a fotonovela, which is kind of a cousin. But the idea is that you've got some kind of a story rather than just a conveyance of facts. You've got, it could be a family situation, it could be a romantic situation, it depends on the particular subject matter. But that's what we decided to use for the particular story. So we needed to come up with a general kind of storyline. We worked on that at Purdue and came up with an idea that would, we started out thinking, well, would it be a wedding feast? We needed to get a bunch of people together. We needed to get women and men in the same situation. We decided, well, maybe that wouldn't be the best. We moved to something that would be easier to photograph, and that was just a kitchen scene where, again, we're looking at differences in, for example, the role of women. And there's several aspects of that I want to touch on. Partly you can see, if you look in the novella, you've got all the women together in the kitchen, which is not an atypical thing for the Latino family to be engaging in. But another factor in using this this format was the role of women in terms of conveying health information. And from what the California team told us, generally the men are probably not going to be in a health fair or another situation where they're going to be picking up a lot of health-related information. Generally, the women are going to be the ones that would gather that information and also convey it to the family. So we started off fairly women-oriented in the beginning of the novella. We've got the man entering the picture after the women leave to the barbecue and trying to convince him that his aches and pains are not necessarily just a matter of aging, and so that they have to convince him to actually see a physician or a healthcare provider, and that way we get him into the doctor where we can convey some of the more specific information about arthritis and treatments of arthritis. But it did take kind of a roundabout story to be able to do that. So, just in terms of why we even decided to look at some kind of Spanish version, I'm sure in probably your state, as in Indiana, the Latino or Hispanic population has expanded significantly. I was just checking the 2010 census, and it looks like from 2000 until 2010, the Hispanic or Latino population has increased about 43% in the United States. So, definitely we're seeing that as a population that is essential, is important, especially in agriculture, and one that we have to look at several of these factors when we're trying to design something that would be effective. And again, we don't want to just translate something and have it so that we can say we translated it. We're trying to make it something that will be effective and usable. And especially from the California group, this has been well accepted in their camps and at health fairs and other places where they distribute information. And Rusty might be able to add some thoughts to this in terms of how to get this out. Oftentimes, a novella like this will be passed on. Somebody will read it, it'll go to another family member or another family. So hopefully it'll get multiple uses. But some of the areas they've targeted for distribution would be not only going to migrant camps, but also health clinics where migrant seasonal farm workers would frequent. But I know we've talked with Transition Resources about things like fiestas and other community gatherings that might be useful. Do you have any other thoughts, in terms of?
Well, as you know, when our staff went out to recruit customers for our program, we did distribute the novella. We also distributed the Bright Uniground brochure. And so there have been probably thousands of them distributed in Indiana. And to me, face-to-face presentations to talk about arthritis.
Mm-hmm.
The topic is really in a good way, because then you build a rapport with somebody face-to-face that you're talking to. So
Right.
that's still my recommendation to you.
And
Well, we also use the Catholic churches in Oklahoma through our migrant seasonal farm worker program, and we disseminate it through the Catholic churches.
Good. Good. That's a good idea. I think that's all the essential information. I know we're running out of time right now. If you have some questions, we can take those. I'll check to see if there are any other things. Oh, just in terms of some of the features, even if you're being sensitive to the culture. When we were doing a multi-region publication, we had to be sensitive not only to the Latino culture in general, but the specific differences between Latinos in Indiana and Latinos in California. We don't want to show people dressed in a way that would alienate another group. For example, if you showed only people working in vineyards or, you know, places like that, it's not going to play too well in Indiana where we don't have as many vineyards. And even the way they, you know, wear a hat, or they wear a scarf, or do they wear a bandana, there are factors like that. And so one of the things that California helped us out with a lot was pre-testing in terms of, you know, is this going to be acceptable? Is this language going to be acceptable? Is the word going to be acceptable? Is the image acceptable? So that's one thing they emphasize is pre-testing, and I know some of the team from Transition Resources also helped us with that in terms of, you know, these were taken in California. Are they still going to be accepted here? So those are important things to think about with any of these culturally sensitive publications. Is that get the input from the community before you actually print it.
Does anyone have an embarrassing moment where you?
That's funny.
You know, where you tried your very best to try to address a need, and you found out you ordered the wrong food, or you ordered. Anybody can relate to that?
I shouldn't say this, but as a medical provider, I, a few years back, once thought a young lady was pregnant, and when I mentioned that fact, and she said she wasn't, and I felt like I was about that big. So,
Okay.
very embarrassing, probably the most embarrassing.
I used to be an event planner in a former life, and so I planned weddings and receptions and all the nice details. And